Yeah, Mark Hunt is suing the UFC, and not just the UFC. He's suing Dana White. He's suing Brock Lesnar. He filed a civil lawsuit against those three named defendants in Nevada District Court yesterday. And I spoke to Mark about why he was taking these lengths. I mean, I don't think we need to give a whole lot of backstory in this. I think a lot of people are aware of why Mark is not happy with those three named defendants. UFC 200, the situation surrounding it. You know, Brock Lesnar, the UFC waiving a 4-month mandatory testing window. He actually fails a pre-fight drug test, but it doesn't come out until after the fight. So he's actually allowed to fight despite the fact he failed a test, and then he was fined $250,000 off of a multi-million-dollar payday. Mark Hunt, not happy about any of that. So he played his last card essentially in filing this lawsuit. And before we get to the 5 headlines, obviously this is going to be one of the 5 headlines. I thought we'd play some sound from my phone interview with Mark, and the other voice you're going to hear is his attorney, Christina Denning. And what they're going to be talking about is, Mark saying why he filed this lawsuit, and then Christina is sort of talking about what led up to it. So if we can play that sound, let's take a listen.
Yeah, I want to start a precedent where these guys need to be held accountable for their actions. They're not. I mean, a year ban isn't good enough. I mean, $250,000 isn't good enough for a guy that made probably $20 million on the night. Why should he get anything when he goes and breaks the rules? I don't think it's. I mean, UFC just pushes it off like they do every other time they've caught someone. He's got to go through the system. Well, the system sucks. It doesn't work properly. You know, I mean, if I got caught for juicing or something and I made $20 million, I said, here, take the $250,000 from the $20 million. I don't give a that's a year thing out. These guys don't give a rat's. So they're not saying, oh wow, this is something I should look at really carefully because the penalties aren't harsh enough. And me doing this lawsuit is to let these guys, the UFC and all these guys say, well, no, it's not all right. You can't keep doing that. I mean, 3 times is enough. If I had accepted the fight in Melbourne, that's 4 times. That's rubbish. So no.
So before a penalty was imposed at the administrative stage by the NAC, the UFC felt like it couldn't include such a clause. Now, since we found out what happened in Brock Lesnar's hearing, and now that we know that his penalty is only 10% of the purse amount, we then went back to the UFC, and with respect to the prior UFC 200 fight, we have offered to accept the purse amount less the $250,000 penalty in order to resolve all the claims that are laid out in the complaint. And we've also offered, moving forward, to accept a clause that sets forth that same formula, that basically the UFC would exercise its ability under the anti-doping policy to the extent that it doesn't conflict with what the Athletic Commission does. And Mark raised something very important at the beginning of this conversation. He said, the penalties aren't harsh enough. What's interesting is that the penalties are harsh enough on paper, they're just not being enforced.
Brett, Mark Hunt's got a heck of a case here. It's very, very interesting because, Brett, the key factor here is everyone after the fact knew that Brock was going to come back. He announces on June 4th that he's coming back for UFC 209 on July 9th. You look like the kind of shape he in. Everybody knew he was coming back before then. Very interesting case when his pre-camp drug testing is waived with that special situation. Pops twice, one before the fight, one the night of. Does he have a case in your eyes?
Yeah, this could have been a Brian Campbell conspiracy theory if we had that segment running before UFC 200, because Brock Lesnar did look like he was in great shape. And that's what they're saying, is that the UFC and Brock knew that he was coming back well before. He could have been being randomly drug tested for the 4 months that he was supposed to, but the UFC did not announce his fight. And they're basically saying that we feel like there's probably some documents that prove that. They don't have that, and that's where this case lies, I think, is a discovery process. And I'm not saying that I'm a legal expert here, but where this case will really hinge upon is the discovery phase. If they're able to find some document that proves, their speculation that the UFC may have known or should have known that Brock Lesnar was using banned substances, they didn't didn't follow through on it. They didn't expedite those results to get them in front. When they finally did drug test him on June 28th, they didn't expedite the results to get them back ahead of the fight. So they have a case, and they have enough to definitely file something, and then we'll see how the UFC reacts. A lot of these cases, they end up getting settled. Mark Hunt is looking to make the situation right. Usually, Brian, money makes the situation right, at least to some degree, and I think that's kind of what he's looking for, because he's looking around and saying, look, I was the guy who got in the cage with this with Brock. And where's my money? I'm not getting anything from this. And this guy has basically gotten no penalty. So I think he's angry. He's frustrated. He believes he deserves some money. Going back to her comments on it, they asked for essentially just pull Brock Lesnar's purse. You have the right to do that. It says so in the anti-doping policy. You have that right to pull away his full purse and give it to Mark. Do it. Do the right thing. The UFC, of course, did not agree to that. And so now Mark is, again, like I mentioned, playing his last card, and that's this lawsuit.
Yeah, it's just bad luck in this case for Hunt, because this is 3 straight fights, right, where he's went up against a fighter who later had doping allegations and had situations after that. And, Hunt, of course, will be back UFC 209 March 4th in Vegas. Decent fight here against Alistair Overeem. Looking forward to that. He said he's turned down a couple fights since UFC 200. Was such a situation where he just, got to a point where he had to get back in there, had to make some money, couldn't be sitting away fighting it?
Yeah, basically. I mean, he still needs to work, and he said, fans have been telling me, well, just leave the UFC. He can't. He's under an exclusive contract, and he just signed that contract, I believe, last year. So he has fights left on his deal, and you mentioned it, man. I mean, that's 3 consecutive fights where his opponent has ran into anti-doping issues. And then one of the fights he turned down was Josh Barnett, and then it turned out Josh Barnett was just recently flagged with a potential violation, and now he's facing Alistair Overeem, who has himself failed a drug test. So it's very, very easy to see where Mark Hunt's frustrations lie. Whether or not he'll be successful in this lawsuit, I mean, it's far too early to tell, but interesting times.
Yeah, it just makes me mad that the UFC had a chance to get the results of that first pre-camp test before Lesnar actually appeared in the cage, and they didn't pay the extra money to go through with it. You hope that at the very least this just leads to change, Brett. That's what we want.